Hi guys, I'm Ben Dunning and today we're at 6 Bullets Tattoo in North London. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to tattoo 3RL liner Blackwork Surrealism, so let's get into it. Okay, so now we're going to start the process of the whole day and the whole tattoo. And what I'm doing first of all is getting a nice clean razor, and I usually dry shave and go downwards. Do it nice and lightly, just grazing over the whole arm. Depending on how hairy they are, it's only a single blade razor. And Esme is not very hairy, so that's wonderful. But it just helps the hair like brush off easier. If I use like a green soap and wipe it away, the hair can like stay on there. So I just dry shave, use a dry tissue, just wipe off any excess hair. What I usually do is get some alcohol, just dry the skin out a little bit more. Give it a pat dry, really dry out the skin, it's going to help when the stencil stuff is applied. Help the stencil last longer. All right, next process, I like to mark up where my stencil is going to be. So I've got my stencil already pre-cut and pre-sized. What I'm going to do, get it central is where I need to be. So I'll use get my skin marker and leave a few marks so I know where to reapply. Okay, so when I've got the stencil where I need it to be, a bit of micropore tape just to hold it all into place. So what I'm using, I just use any stencil product will work just as well, but like a thumbful of stencil stuff. Nice tacky amount, not too much. Don't want the stencil to bleed out. Just dry any excess bits off. Just down the middle, even pressure. And also what I like to do as well is I like to put little slits in my stencil. If it's over like a rounded area, or it's got a bit of bend in the area, then a few little slits in the side of the stencil just helps this paper bend a little bit more. Down, just roll out. Then, stencil reveals aren't usually my strong point, but you should have the worst stencil reveal you will ever see. That's a horrendous stencil reveal. So, when we've applied the stencils, we're going to give it like 5–10 minutes to dry. Usually if there's any like imperfections in the stencil, I've got a skin marker. I can just tidy up any little lines with the skin marker. But yeah, we're going to give this 5–10 minutes to settle. And then we're going to get into the tattoo. That's what I usually do. I usually start from the bottom, use a bit of hustle butter or any sort of Vaseline or anything that you use over the area, over the stencil. It just stops any smudging or any bleeding. Right, okay. So what I tend to do is I usually start at the bottom and work my way up. Just slowly, pendulum motion, up and down, building up the tones. Now with my machine and my needles, so I'm currently using a Quadron 0.25 3-round liner, and I'm using a Bishop wand liner, so that's got the 5mm stroke, which for blackwork is perfect. You can get the good amount of stipple because it just hits a bit harder than the 0.42. With regards to what I run my machine on, it does vary, but at the start I run it quite low, so I run it at 6.3, and I'm using an Illusionist power pack. But like I say, every power pack is completely different. I'm just used to this one personally. So 6.3 on this machine might be slightly different to the critical, but And another thing you'll notice is that when I'm wiping the stencil, I'm just patting it, and it's usually quite dry. Again, just like preserves the stencil a bit better. Instead of just wiping it away, you just wipe the whole thing. So again, just pendulum motion, just building up tone like a drawing. Backwards and forwards. And it's almost like an arc. So when I'm kind of going in at an angle and backwards at the same angle. So it's like the whole pendulum motion. So I'm brushing it on the way in and like flicking out at the end. Again, the thing with like this sort of style is it's just building up tone. I'm not packing in black straight away. If I'm packing in black, then obviously we'll talk about it later on, but in terms of the beginning bit, purely just building it up. And this allows me, running it at a lower speed, allows me more passes at the skin as well. So the first pass, I guess I'm just kind of opening up the skin and then just slowly building it up, continuing the same motion over and over. And also it's important for me, the direction of the piece. So currently, again, with this part, it's almost like a teardrop motion. So I'm going to be going up and down following my stencil. Up, down, up, down. Again, with what I use, I try not to use like, in fact, I don't use any grades. I use purely black. Because with black, I'm still able to get lighter tones by just, again, grazing the skin. And if I want to go darker, I'll just do a few more passes in that area. And I found that the inks that I use are perfect for my style, which allows me to get the blacks to stay black and even the lighter tones to stay dark and last, well, for the rest of the time. Is I use dynamic triple black that I do get from Killer Ink. But again, I think I used to use silverback, and then I actually got tattooed with dynamic, and I saw how dark it was, and it just completely changed the way I work. It's the same with like anything over time. The needles I started off with years ago, or even 2 years ago, is completely different now, because the good thing about this job is you're always learning, always finding something, new techniques, always new. It's adapting as well. But again, currently with my setup, it's the Quadrant 0.25 3-round liner. I just like the tighter groupings personally. You still get a stipple. I mean, there are obviously the 0.3 and the 0.35, but with my work, again, I'm trying to replicate what I do with my Bic drawings. It's where it's a finer point and I'm just approaching it the same way. And the tighter groupings just allow me to get all those extra details that I get in, especially when I'm working in really small, tight areas. Okay, and obviously different parts of the lower part of the wrist here, obviously the skin is slightly tougher, and we've got a bit of scarring here, so we've had to avoid the scarring with the chain, obviously, so it'll be completely different to the way we work up the top. I am going to quickly start lining in this chain, so I'm going to turn my machine up, run it slightly higher to about 7.2. I'll approach it, and what I usually do is then I usually pull towards myself. I know some people pull away, but with what I do, pull the skin tight. Yeah, it's like muscle memory as well. Every couple of minutes, just apply a bit more hustle butter or whatever you use. Patting the area dry, and then repeating. Again, always pulling towards yourself. Well, you can pull up, but it's just the way I prefer to work. So the reason I work from bottom to top as well is it just stops me, kind of like a printer. The way I look at it is when you start at the bottom and just gradually finish the piece as you work out. That way, especially when it gets later on in the tattoo, it's obviously going to be a bit less painful and you haven't got to go over any areas that have been opened up. And then by the end, if there's any redness, obviously by the time you finish, many hours have been by and the redness will have settled down. Again, currently, because I'm doing the chain, is line work, so I've increased the voltage of my machine. And I think another thing is as well is trying to do each line in one motion, so try not to get halfway down, stop, Then you have to try and refine the line again, and you might get the kink in the line, and nobody wants a wonky chain. Again, a lot of tattooing, it's just repetition. Same with anything, just do the same things over and over. An easier technique is just to put some hustle bar on the glove hand, or you just go to it. It's easily accessible. Good thing about, again, chains and stuff, you can be a bit more expressive with it. So again, with the pulling of the lines, and I want them to be straight, so you try and do it in one motion is better. But if you've got a wonky chain like this one, a bit broken, you can be a bit expressive, so you haven't really got to worry. Another thing to notice would be, sometimes if the skin is a bit tougher, you may have to run the machine like slightly higher than normal. But again, it's just adapting to the area. Like, every skin type is different. Every body type is completely different. So one setup might be different to another. Base it on client to client basis. But generally, it's the same. It's quite rare that I've got to change it, or if I haven't charged my battery pack enough, you can usually just steal the machine. Think of it as an extension. It's kind of like if you do painting or drawing, it's the same. Like, if you've got a bit of a blunt pencil, then you know. Same with needles. It's just become a bit of second nature now. It's just, like I said, dipping of the ink every couple of, well, every 10 seconds or so, I do like to dip. Or if I've done a long line, you don't want to run out of ink halfway through a line, and you've got to do the whole thing of finding the line again. I won't lie to you though, I do have a general working from bottom to top, but I do bounce around a little bit in the bottom area. Alright, I'm just going to shade one of the chains now. So again, with my needle depth, I probably hang it out width of a pound coin. I do slightly overhang my needle, so I do hang it out quite far, but I am not putting in the whole depth of the needle. The longer I hang it out, especially with the voltage of it, it does give me a bit more control. And then with the hustle butter, it just stops any of the ink like spatting out everywhere. Okay, so now we're just going to shade one part of the chain. So the light direction for me is obviously up here, so which means the opposite side of the chain is going to be darker. So the way I do my shading is I kind of do like a zigzag motion. So I'm going to work my way down. Again, run it at about 6.2, following it down, zigzag, zigzagging all the way down. Sometimes I do follow the same direction, but generally with shading like a darker area, it's that continuous zigzagging down. Another way to do it is you can just do like continuous lines. So for example, beforehand I would have been keeping the needle in the skin, working my way down. But with this one, it's every stroke is out, in, whipping down. It's a slow process, and I will be going over bits that I've tattooed before, give the skin a chance to settle down. So that was tattooed like 5-10 minutes ago, and I'll just go over it again just to darken it out. Again, don't forget we're doing Blackwork Realism now, so it's not, with my realism background, I do tend to overthink the shading, but in terms of black work, it's important. The key word in there is black. So we will be using a lot of black. But it's not black and grey, it's black work. That's why I only use black. And when we get to the lighter shading, I'll talk to you through how I do a light shade with just pure black. It's pretty easy. On another side note, one mistake I did make when I was younger is having too much coffee in the morning and not enough food. No one wants a shaky hand. So this is going to be a pure black bit. I'm still going to keep it running at 6.2. I'm just going to keep the needle in the skin a bit more. Keep it in, I'm not going to take it out. Little circular motions just to get the little pocket of black that I need. Working our way down. On a smaller scale, in terms of line work, I try to leave, if the details are too small, then obviously over time, if the gap is too tight, then over time the gap will just close. So I try to leave at least a 5mm gap, or at least a couple of mil. So with me, I like to have my reference just to the side. I keep my reference of my drawing to the side of me, but I also do keep the stencil of it as well, side by side, just so I can refer to it with each line. Kind of like paint by numbers, is the way I look at it. Right. And again, with little pockets of black, it's not a case of, especially with a 3, and you're doing like a larger area, then I will do small circular motions and keep the needle in the skin to get the solid black. With shading, it's different because you want the stippled look, but with solid black, I still want it to be solid black, even if it's with a 3. Again, it's important to know your needle depths. You'll know instantly, especially if you hang your needle out too far and you're pressing too deep, you will obviously it will bleed out. Again, don't forget to, every time I do approach a line, especially with the light sources as well, it's pulling towards you every time. If I was to run this higher, I would move my hand quicker because I do want a slight stippled effect. All right, so I'm just gonna wipe away some of the excess ink here, just it's a bit muddied up. So again, I try not to use too much of my like green, well, pink soap, my bubble soap. So I usually use a thin amount, so a small amount, just a squirt. Just turn it back on. Just so I've got more control over it, and it's, again, I can control. I'm not going to wipe away any of the stencil. So another important thing as well, sorry, is when you dip your ink cap, try to hold it in there for at least a few seconds to allow the whole ink cap to fill up. Try not to just dip really quickly in and out, just keep it in there for a few seconds, let the whole tube fill up. Gives you a bit more longer. Right, okay, so we're continuing away from that line, starting long strokes. Try and keep them as even as possible. It's not the end of the world, but try and be consistent with the strokes, the same pressure, same needle depth. Again, building it up, so then going over it again. Pushing in at the start and whipping out at the end. Again, on a larger area where you've got a bit more of a gap, you can obviously move your machine quicker, but because this is such a thin gap, I want to be able to control my needle, especially where it's so fine. All right, and you'll notice here that I'm using hustle butter, and I found that for me personally, especially when I'm working with black, obviously there's going to be a lot more, it's a lot harder to control in terms of the ink flow, and it can like spat everywhere on the skin and you lose your stencil. But with hustle butter, it's like almost like a thick glide. It smells great, but for me the most important thing is it preserves my stencil. Okay, so another thing you can do around this area is, it's like with drawing as well, is cross hatching. So obviously I've gone down at one point and I've gone completely opposite way, creating the cross hatch to create the dark to light tone that I'm going to get in the pocket of this eye here. Nice and controlled, same needle depth, same speed, makes it easy to follow the line. Again, dabbing it, building it up slowly. Even though this is black work, I bounce around between, I want the stipple, but I want it to look realistic as well. Okay, eyelashes, so I know I said earlier about my little lines, but it's a little short line. I want it to look like a lash, so I'm going to flick out at the end. I'm actually going to work up this time. It's very rare that I do this. Let's just finish this off. I want it to be the same tone as well. I don't want it to be too dark in some areas. Any butters, but again, hustle butter in general, or any sort of the butters that you use, I apply quite a thick amount, usually within a couple of inches of the area I'm working in. So if there is any like ink spatters and it goes slightly above or below, The hustle button is like, it just protects the stencil. So again, with the threes, with my, it's taken me about a year and a half, 2 years for me to get to my point where I'm happy with my setup. So especially with the stippled Blackwork side of the work that I'm doing, the point, well, the 3-round liner is just perfect for what I need, because I like the stipple, but I like it to not be too stipply. So I still want to see this like individual needle markings and the stippled look, but I like them to be super fine. And the stuff I do is relatively on a smaller scale with still a lot of detail. And I think for me personally, I think the 3-round liner just allows me to get all the smaller details in, and having it as a 0.25 gauge, again, because the groupings are so tight, like a single is too small for me personally, and a 5 I think is still too thick. So it's a preference for me personally, and trying it, and just the extra 2 needles, especially in the areas that I like to work in and how low I run it, it just works for me. And the 3 just allows me to get everything I need to do using one needle. And they're really quite sharp anyway, so they do go into the skin nicely. If I'm working quite slow, I do need the needle to obviously penetrate the skin without me having to go through 4 or 5 times just marking it in. I do need the ink to go in within the first, or opening up the skin itself. Otherwise you're going to work the skin too much and you're going to get rawness, you're going to get redness. Same again with the other side now. Sometimes I will twist my machine as well, so I usually where the opening of the needle is, where you can see the actual needle itself, the cartridge, is I like to work my way down. So having this where I can see it, otherwise if it's upside down, you're going to get some drag back. So, and you might snag the needle. So just twist it to where you're working. I still want to maintain that downward motion. And again, to make sure you're getting that consistent line, when I hold my machine, you'll notice I have my pinky out, and I basically use that as my, I guess an easel, I balance off of it. So spread the skin, use your left hand to spread the skin, use your tattooing hand to pull the other side, but you're balancing off it. And it just allows me to like work my way across. Like my finger's not moving, but my hand is. It's almost like a stabilizing finger. So I have quite a chunky grip. So what I usually do is I wrap my machine in general, but then I like to pad it out, say with tissue and then a whole wrapper grip tape, purely because longevity of my hands, it's the vibration. Having something in my hand for a long period of time, you're gonna get cramp. You don't want to be choking the machine. I basically want to be, the machine will do the work for me, so I'm just guiding the machine. So even the weight of it itself, I like to have less of a choke hold on the actual machine and just have it resting in my hands. Again, purely preference, and it's longevity of my hands in general, especially if I'm doing drawings or I'm tattooing for prolonged periods of time, 4 or 5 times a week. And then the vibration of the machine, and then I go home and I draw, I'm trying to keep my hand, preserve it, so I can do this for many more years. But again, it's preference. I know artists that like a smaller grip, but for me, I just like having the idea of like just balancing it. And after a long day, my hand doesn't hurt as much, because it's basically like extra, it's like soundproofing. Soundproofing my hand. Again, you can be quite expressive in the darker areas now, so you'll find that I spoke earlier about having the same direction of shading, which is still very important, but I'd say that's purely for the first few layers, especially when you're getting a long amount of shade in, if you're trying to get a long area of like a fade, then that's when you're going to want to use the same lines and almost as you get further down, whip it out a lot more. So as we're up higher in the darker areas, you can be working a lot more into the skin. As we get further down, the strokes will become slightly longer, so that way you will still get the stippled effect. As we slowly work our way up, we're going to go from dark to light pretty quickly, so I'm going to put in my darker tone first, just to mark it in. Again, we dab again. Now we've got that gap of white. Again, if you get any excess ink in your cartridge, just use your tissue, just rest it on top, let it bleed through. And it should stop any excess ink getting onto your tattoo. Okay. Alright, it's pretty similar to the bottom eye. So we're just going to, this is a tone lighter, so it's not going to be solid black, so like the same application I did for the solid black, I just won't press as hard. So small circular motions, keeping control over the machine and the needle, and slowly building it up. Again, we're talking about the tight little pockets that we have here. This is why the 3 works for me. And I hang out, that's another reason why I hang out further than your standard needle depth, I guess. Again, I was always taught the width of a pound coin. Sometimes I'll bring it out slightly further, especially if I'm working on a lighter area. That way, I can just see where the needle is, see where the ink's coming, where the ink flow is. Let's work our way up again. With a lot of my layers, I work with a mag. I found I probably had less chances at the skin almost, so I had less chances to get the tones I wanted in, but I can just slowly build it up, working back to front, constantly in and out. I'm not keeping it in the skin for this bit. It's like pretty much loads of individual lines, like a tally chart, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and slowly working your way across consistently. That allows you more control. What works for me is, because these needles are super tight, and the fact that I'm running it at 6.2, and then so when I am applying the pressure, the needle again, because this is the wand liner, it's a 5mm stroke, so it's a very powerful machine. So the machine is doing all the work. So basically what I'm doing is I'm almost like, it's almost like snagging the skin. So you're just like pressing in at the top, just dragging each line, but I'm hardly applying any pressure. Just like a constant whip out. I would say grazing, because we're still going to be building it up. Especially for the lighter areas, and the fact that I'm just using black and I want this area to be quite light, I'm basically just scratching the skin. Again, I will bounce around in my style of, so in an area like here, for example, I want it to be a dark to light fade. So that's when I'll use the same angular strokes and the same motion, and then slowly build it up back to front instead of the cross hatching. Because I purely want it to be a dark to light fade. So you find out which, that's what I mean. So you have the pendulum motion, you hang out your machine, so you do the motion before you reach the skin, just so you can start to find out when the needle's hitting. Then you found your depth, and you just maintain that same pressure, working your way across, and you found your needle depth. So what we're going to do, we're going to get the eye finished, and then we'll work on the chains. Same as before, little pocket of black. I'm probably going to keep my needle, I'm going to keep my needle in the skin this time. Then use your hustle butter, use your butters, plenty of it. Hang needle out. Make sure your cartridge is full, and then work your way up. And what I said about the packing black with a 3, I said I don't want to churn the skin up, so again I'm running it at 6.2 and I'm keeping that consistent speed, consistent depth, but keeping the needle in the skin. again, not applying too much pressure because the machine will do the work for you. I think it's the difference between a rotary is like almost no give. It's consistent. Okay, same as before. Now I'm going to be whipping up my line to get the lash. Because I want it to look like a hair follicle, so I want to whip out at the end. Just got to get into that routine of the angle of the machine, the area you're working on, what kind of shade you want. Do you want to, if you want the stippled effect, then you can hang the machine, press into the skin a bit more and almost like drag the needle. I'm using a lot of whipping motion. Apart from solid areas of black, any sort of shading, the most common thing I could tell you to do would just be the idea of whipping. And you'll notice if you can hear the machine, being able to hear your machine is really very important as well. I mean, you get an idea and feel for a machine, but sometimes if you're wearing headphones and you're wearing your music, you not hear the machine almost. Although you should be able to like gauge what you're doing by feel and look. The needle can almost become blunt, especially if you're working with like little fine details. You need a fresh, almost like a sharp needle. Get a small pocket there, keeping the machine and the needle in, because I don't want to fade here. I want to keep it solid black so the needle will stay in. Again, don't press too hard. Get a comfier position. I will move myself around the tattoo, so I won't stay stationary the whole time, because some angles I know I can't pull a clean line. If I'm here and I need to do a curve, then I want to adjust my body to that curve. Because the human body is not like a piece of paper. Obviously it curves, it moves around, it warps. So if you're not confident in the line before you begin it, just get yourself in a comfy position. Again, because you don't want to start a line and then realize you can't make it and you have to stop, readjust. Okay, so in this area here, it's going to be a consistent, almost like one tone the whole way. So we're going to start left to right and work our way across, because my balance is going to be over here, and I'll just basically move my hand slowly across. Almost like a printer. So we've applied our hustle butter, and I'm going to start slowly, like the zigzag motion I said earlier. Again, I'm grazing the skin, allowing me control and making it in one pass. Okay, and then now we just build it up, so we go over it again. Pretty much the same angle. Spread the skin, make sure it's tight. Slowly working our way across, keep maintaining balance. I mean, that's probably the most important finger for me is my little finger. It just gives me the balance that I need. I think a mistake a lot of people make, well, another thing with the black is to create like a dark to light. I do like to go over most of the skin, or at least open the whole area up, and then almost build a tone up towards it and work my way backwards. So I know even though the area is light, that's probably my lightest point now, and what I'll do now is I'll just build it up slightly from my darker area and just whip out almost like half of what I've just done. So I've opened up like, almost like the whole area, but then now I just want to build up where I want the dark to be, which is just basically half of what I've just already done. Same technique, just taking it halfway back. Again, I start at my dark line, at my darkest point. I'm starting here and then whipping out from the dark the dark area, and then whipping out at the end, so you're getting that gradual fade. And don't worry about how long things take. Like especially with like Blackwork realism, you're still building up tone, so don't worry about how long things are taking. You're just slowly building it up. Same techniques. Consistency is key. Okay, I'm just going to darken up this area just a bit more because I want the contrast. Because we're going to go from black to a grey inside, so this will be our darkest part. And don't forget that almost like pendulum motion, and then just like working your way across. Same needle depth, same pressure. Don't worry if it's too messy, you can still see what you're working with. But okay, so in this area here is going to be quite light, so basically all I want to do here is just whip out halfway, starting at my darkest point. And this is where we bring in the cross hatching. Again, you're just grazing the skin. You want to build it up. Black can be very unforgiving, especially if you're only using black and you've got a lighter area. So I've just changed my needle over. I felt like it was just getting a bit, like I say, some needles can be slightly different. There's almost like I don't want to say like a dud, but just wasn't hitting the same way I was feeling it. It's one of those things where you know your machine and you know how things hit, and sometimes it wasn't hitting the way I wanted it to. So fresh needle, again straight back into it. Keep building it up. I'll be saying that a lot this time. It's just patience and just building tone. That's all you're doing. You're just building layers and layers and layers over and over and over again. It's just getting you used to the idea that rhythm, technique, it's repetition. So now I'm just going to go finish off the bottom eye, because again I put all of my first layers in and then giving it time to settle down. And I'm just going to go back in, just tighten any bits up that now the blood's sort of settled down, I can go back into it, see where the ink, say, hasn't fully gone in. Like I say, having good lighting really helps as well. So find yourself a loop. Again, I can already tell with this needle already, it's just hitting a lot better. It is okay as well to simplify some details. If your design, if you've had to go slightly smaller than you were expecting to, then sometimes you can purely just simplify the design. If there's a really tiny detail, maybe I'll put in some solid black instead of putting a small detail in, just in terms of longevity. You can approach this the same way as if this was to go be twice the size, I would still approach this the exact same way. It's just sometimes the smaller the details, the slower I'd probably work a little bit more. There's a lot less room for error. Especially with my surrealism, the distortion aspect of a tattoo design, there's loads of little breaks in the skin where you'd have black and then you'd have a skin break. So it's important to leave enough of a gap. So over time, if the ink does spread, then it's still going to be there. I can later on when we do maybe some highlights in, then just to break it up a little bit. But going back to an area after an hour or so, just to see how the skin is, and like I said earlier, about has the ink settled in, is there full coverage, or can you go back in and add another little layer of ink. Always think about your light source as well, where is the light coming from, and you want to work away from where that light would be, naturally where the shadow would be. Again, again, remember what I said earlier about if you want a soft blend using just black and like a 3, and you want a nice subtle blend, it's just purely longer strokes. You don't need to worry about changing the speed of the machine. Purely longer strokes. It's starting with the needle goes in at the darkest point at the top, and then you kind of like almost like scooping it out almost. The skin is quite forgiving with this technique because you're not going straight in. You're just literally just gliding over it. I think of it like a printer as you work your way across. And like I say, trust where you're going as well. Like an example of that was where there was almost some ink just came out onto the skin. I wouldn't be able to see where I'm going, but it does happen with line work as well. But you got to trust where you're going, trust your needle, trust like where you're moving the machine. Again, so I didn't need to stop because I knew and I trusted where my hand was, and same motion, same technique, and I just continued what I was doing. Just soothe the skin. Apply a thin layer, I spot over the whole thing. So now we're just kind of fine-tuning the details, adding any sort of extra bits of black, because we've got the blend that we need. We're just going to emphasize the black, because naturally now that's our light tone there, so we're just going to emphasize our tone up here. I do find myself revisiting spots throughout the tattoo. Maybe I'll spot something an hour or two away, and I'll just emphasize a little bit, or I'll go back in. It's not a problem. Basically all we're doing now is what we've done, and just doing the same technique we were at the beginning, but just adding a bit more ink and a bit more saturation. Because a lot of people think you can't really get much saturation with a 3, or it's, you can't like pack, which you can. You keep going over and over. Also know the skin type of your client as well. That's really important. Like, is their skin inflamed within the first pass of the skin, and you're going to have to adjust what you're doing. I'm quite lucky Esme's got good skin. Another tip is, before your client comes in, maybe a week before, email them to like moisturize the area that they're going to get tattooed for like a week. So by the time they come in, because some people have, like I say, dry skin. It's so many different skin types, and you have to adapt accordingly. So I'm going to do something real quick. I'm just going to start to lose my stencil a little bit on this chain here. So I'm just going to adjust my machine so it's back into its lining. So I've run it to like a 7.4 now, just my lining speed. I'm just going to quickly tidy up this bit. Again, having your reference at hand, so I know where my line is. And I'm following the right line. Okay, I set a curve there. So now I'm going to find the line again. Again, because these lines are so tight together, I'm going to simplify this one slightly. Because I know over time that probably won't hold as well. But there are things where, like chains and stuff, you can be a bit more expressive with them. It hasn't got to be like perfect. That's a good thing about surrealism and blackwork, or any tattoo. Just take some, things will change midway through a tattoo. The shading that is there as a guideline. On my references, sometimes I just add a bit more if it looks like the tattoo needs it, and So you notice that I came down there and I'm going to stop the line, refill my ink cap, my cartridge. Okay, find the point I need to again and then work my way into the point. If you start the line here, you almost end up with like almost like a spot because you started the line. If you end the line at the point, you're not going to have like the starting point of the needle, which is usually a bit chunkier almost. Let's find our line, end at the point. So while we're here, let's just finish up the line work real quick. A nice spread of the skin. Obviously that's very important in any form of tattooing, is making sure the skin is tight. That naturally on the forearm, the skin's naturally quite taut anyway. Again, you can add a little bit more, just like use one hand just to pull one way, your resting hand to pull the other. Again, maintaining that same pressure throughout the line. Otherwise you'll have different like thicknesses of line weight. Okay, so now we've got a nice curve here, so I'm going to just change myself a little bit, just so I know I can make that curve better from this side. And again, I'm used to this running speed, so if I was to run this even higher, then I would obviously move my machine quicker and move my hand. Again, I just moved her a little bit because I felt more comfortable approaching it from pulling towards me. Obviously check in on your client as well, but don't forget you have to be comfortable making a line. Just don't sacrifice that because your client may be slightly uncomfortable. I'm sure they won't mind if they want a clean line. But you'll notice as well, like even with my line work and my shading, regardless of speed, I will maintain the same needle depth, and the way I hang my needle will be the exact same. Especially in these curved lines, this is where it's important. Especially on a smaller scale, there's no room for error, so just find a depth, start the line, almost get quite close to the skin, almost make small movements so you can just find out where the needle is, and then same pressure. And because the skin is taut, if I approached it towards the end of the line, if I was too close, the skin would always be like a bit too much bunched up and you might have a snag of a needle. Which is why it's really important to really stretch that skin. Again, we still need to finish the eye, but I feel I'm still working bottom to top, almost like left to right. I tend to try and complete things as I go, but I do have a tendency to, again, give it an hour to settle and then come back to it. So I'll go show you a quick example now. I'm going to run my machine a bit quicker. So now we go 7.9, so it is running a bit quicker, so I'm going to run this line a bit quicker. You'll notice the difference. And again, because it's the Bishop one-liner and it's a 5mm stroke, there's hardly that any give on it. So you can you're just guiding the machine. No pressure, just guiding. Okay, now given that time to settle, I can go back to one of the earlier lines, just where I didn't go in quite as much as I needed to. Sorry, Esme. Go back into the shade in the eye now. So let's just wipe down the area we've done. We haven't got to worry about any like stencil going now, so we can just wipe the whole area. Again, thin them out. Hustle butter, soothes the skin, takes away any redness. Okay, so we're going to bring it back down to 6.2. We're just going to finish this eye now. Or eyes, sorry. So you'll notice in this area here, I need like almost like one really light grey tone, so I've just brushed my machine over the top. The good thing about this style as well, it's a very basic setup. It's one cap of black, a 3-round liner, and your machine. I'm just going to go back in, add a bit of cross hatching. I really want to accentuate the surrealism aspect, so I'm just going to highlight some of the curves and warps. I put some solid black in, whereas in my original it's probably a bit lighter, but again, with my drawings I do try and approach it the same way as I would tattoo. When you see it on the skin, sometimes you just need to take a bit of creative liberty and just add a bit of darker tone. Thinking about longevity, I think that's the main thing about tattoo is, you know, I want it to last as well, which is one of the reasons I use dynamic black. It pretty much heals as you see it. You'll notice that whipping. Starting at my darkest point and just whipping away from that point. I feel like I'm always bringing like the needle towards me, so I'm always whipping towards myself 90% of the time. Again, so these little subtle details, I'm just leaving a little mark in. I want there to be enough there that it will last, but I also want it to be quite a subtle bit of shading. And just twist myself, just so I get a better angle. Find my point, and whip away from my dark starting point, which is the top part of the eyelid. Yeah, every time I sort of go to like dip my machine, I might bring a bit of hustle butter with me just to apply a thin amount. Not too invasive on the skin. Again, when I'm going over the same areas, I'm just using the same techniques of and now I'm cross hatching, just building it up. Well, unfortunately, I am a messy pup, so I do require a lot of kitchen roll. You know, it's already starting to take shape now. We're just building up a little bit more, bit by bit. When it comes to the surrealism side of stuff, if you're doing a lot of, again, distortion or anything like wavy, then you're going to need to go into it like a few times just to, because it's not all just one tone. You're going to get a black, you're going to get a lighter. You can create a grey tone with black, but then also if you do it on a smaller scale and it needs to be simplified, just emphasize certain lines, certain like points of the wave, or I'm just going to make this bit slightly darker. That's as light as we want it to be, so I'm just going to bring my machine probably to the midpoint of this bit that's like almost drooping down. So same way as before, pendulum down, but to the halfway point, what we've already got there. So start bringing the needle out halfway down. So then when it does settle down, you're going to see a nice gradient of like black to like grey. You have a nice fade. Okay, we're going to start working it into the chain now. Again, because we need some scarring, I'm going to be a bit more delicate in this area. Okay, so you tidy up this bottom bit of this Now I've given it time to settle, I feel like it could just be a one extra pass of black. That's from giving the skin the time to settle down ever so slightly. Because we're not using a mag here, and I know it's a small area, but because we're using a liner. Okay. So I'm just gonna increase my speed a little bit. We're going to like 6.6, 6.7. And it's slightly higher this time, just because there's a load of naggy little bits of shading now, and I don't want to do it solid black, so I'm just going to run it slightly higher. Okay, so this is an example where I don't want it to be black here, so I'm just going to do one pass of shading. I'm just going to move my arm around, just slowly fan out to like halfway, again using the almost like the tally technique, which is just lines but working your way across. Again, hardly any pressure here, because I know when I wipe this away there's hardly going to be much there, you know, but you are getting a subtle bit of shading just in this area here. Maybe one more time. It's giving me more than enough that I need to get a nice little fade there. And now the same for every single bit. I'm just going to use that same individual lines, working my way across. Well, burp there, sorry. Keep that in. Every artist burps. We all do it, don't lie. Okay. Okay, especially say these little gaps here, it's so fine that just little individual strokes. I applied a bit more pressure down here, just because, again, it's such a small area, it probably needs a bit more pressure just to penetrate the skin. Get to see that second layer. Again, the same old thing, it's the same needle depth. I've changed my machine speed, but I've kept it the same depth. I hang it out the same amount. So in this instance, it'd probably be a good idea. I could have used a 5 in this scenario, but I'm just going to double line to create a slightly thicker line by just using the same needle. Purely because I'm comfortable with my line work, and I know I can follow the same line again, or go slightly to the side of it. I don't want it to be like too thick still. And the lines are very fiddly, so there's a lot less room for error. With shading, you could be a bit more, there is a bit more room for error, because with your shading you can just build the tone up over the top of it, or if you go slightly over a line, it's not a big problem. Just add a bit more shading and just, again, gradually build it up or away from the area. Whereas with line work, you've got to be the confident. That's why you've got to pull the skin, you've got to know where you're going to go, trust your line, make the skin extremely taut, especially on the ribs. That's probably where it's more important. There's a lot more room for error if someone moves. If your client moves, it's obviously not on you, but just be wary of that. So apply a bit of force. I'm a bit firmer when I spread the skin or hold onto an area, just so they're secure as well. Obviously, this is my way of doing chains. Everyone will do a chain slightly different, but this is my way of doing it. It's pretty simple. I have a dark side and a light side, so one side of each piece will be, think the light's coming from this direction, so this bit will be light, the underside will be darker, and then vice versa. I like to add a little bit of shadow on the bottom part of the light side. Just bring that down a little bit. Again, I just adapt to every bit like accordingly. Now we're out of the distortion part, and I can run it a bit slower again. Again, those small little tally marks. individual straight lines, working your way up. Same thing again, go back over. And slowly, just keep building it up. Maybe 2 or 3 passes is more than enough. Because I know how, again, I know how the dynamic triple black heals. So I'm used to how much I need to apply to an area now. But in terms of technique, yeah, it's just those little tally lines and just slowly build up and up and up. Again, in this little pocket of black here, I kept my needle in the skin here. It's such a small amount of black. So I almost do the same thing with the tally, but I just keep it in. So work my way across, but keep the needle in the skin. Again, not applying too much pressure still, but just enough without blowing out the skin. We'll just simplify this bit, we'll do this solid black. Again, on my reference this was shaded, but for the sake of this piece, we'll do a solid black. Such a small area that black will probably look best. Okay, same as before, we're just going to do a gradient here. So we're going to start on our darker end, work our way across, 50% pressure, work our way up to about 3/4 up. Because I do want the skin break at the end. So now we've gone 3/4 of the way, now we'll do the same 50% of the way. It will fade out about here. And then one more time, about 1/3 of the way. And now we've got a nice gradient here. So we're just gonna... Okay, this is why it's important to have your reference in front of you, especially in like these areas, it does get confusing. As much as I love tattooing this stuff, it's a pain in my ass. Again, don't be... you're seeing I'm going over it quite a lot in certain areas, I'm going back to certain areas. It's not a problem, just take your time with it. It's the same thing about, I'd rather go, well, with my black work, I know it's going to heal black, but it's in other aspects, you can probably go a bit, if you'd rather go light first and then hit it back when it comes back healed, then you can do it that way, but I prefer to get at least 90% of the skin coverage like pass over with the needle, so I pass through everything, or 90% of my area, just so there is ink in that part of the skin if I want to look fuller. I don't rely on skin breaks as much in my work because I do like to put in a lot of black. Again, it's purely that repetition, just get used to that repetition, that same way of shading, the same pressure. That's probably the most key thing. Again, this bit's black, so I'm going to keep my machine in. I know I'm staying between the lines because the hustle butt is going to add almost like a lubricant like layer. It stops my ink going everywhere so I can follow my line perfectly. That, and also hanging out your needle. Okay, so hustle butter there. So we're balancing on the little finger and we're just moving our hand across. The pinky isn't moving. Just controlling my hand and working my way up. I'm getting a nice blend at the end. So now it's a bit less ink here, so I'm just going to go over this area again, darken this area. One more pass on here, and I know this will be saturated enough. And obviously when this bit heals, I know it's going to heal solid black without any skin breaks. Same thing as before, let's go to about halfway. And then we go back to our starting point and go back maybe halfway up from this point where we stopped before. All right, now we're just going to tidy up everything we've done just now. Again, this one's slightly longer, I'm just going to do the pendulum motion in this bit. Again, 50% pressure, you're just gliding. Just almost like grazing the skin. Each technique you can use the same way. It's the same principles, where I whip out to like 3/4 of the way up, and then I'd maybe do it again and just do half the way. Got a tremendous amount left to do down here. Now I'm just being very picky with just my smaller details. I'm just going to be a bit pickier with now. Again, because it's such a small area that we're working on, just simplifying it slightly. Simplifying or just enhancing just little lines. I guess a good thing about if you're doing blackwork and one of your lines is slightly off, then and you pack in the black, you can just smooth out the edge. But my lines are perfect, so it doesn't matter. It's a very forgiving style, I feel like, with a blackwork 3-round liner. Very forgiving, so you can go too heavy in an area, and like I say, you can always add like an extra bit of black, and again it allows you to work a bit more on the skin as well. It's not too invasive, which is why you see me go back and forward a lot. I do approach as well. Another quick thing is when I do my line work, I do approach it as like a 45-degree angle when I line. That's why I like to bring it towards me as well. It allows me to see where my needle is. If I'm pulling it away from me, then I've got a bit less visibility, in my opinion. Alright, going to do the last bit of the chain, and we're going to do the Sacred Heart flail. That's the ball. Okay, that's that bottom bit done. I'm going to get another fresh needle just to start some fresh line work, because there's a lot of line work in this part. Let's just some hustle butter on the bit we've already done, soothe the skin. Alright, so I've just changed my needle. I like to have one for lining and one for shading, so if I'm going back into my line work, then I just like to have a fresh needle. Or if there's a lot of line work, I might have two. It's just a preference of mine. Okay, now there's a lot of line work in this bit, so straight back into it. Let's start with a small line. So if you notice there, because there's a lot of ink spill there, I'm just gonna put a bit more hustle butter down. This is where a lot of that trusting where your line's going. And that's another reason I always pull towards me, because if I'm going upwards and then you get like the ink spill, it's a lot harder to control the line or know where you're going. So remember to dab dry, so we're not wiping, and we're not going to wipe away any of the stencil. Again, my tissue is relatively dry when I'm patting it down. If I'm wiping, then I'll put a bit more of my the green soap on it. If I'm doing like a loop like that, I usually like to come round. So I'll start at the point on the inside, work my way around half the circle, and then bring it round. So I'll do the same here. Because I'm only going up a little bit, it's not a problem. But I'll start on the inside of the loop. And then bring that all the way around, just because I have more control. Again, always repositioning myself so I'm always pulling the needle towards me. Again, remember what I said about the angle as well, 45-degree angle, bringing it towards myself. Just better penetration for the needle. It's quite important in these small areas where there's loads of little circles or there's loads of little lines. Maybe pat it dry after every sort of circle or line in general. The worst thing you want is wiping away any of your stencil. If you can do it consistently, then by all means do it. Circles are another one that if you try and do circles in one go, because again, like with line work, if you've got to try and find the line again at halfway through, you're more likely to not going to have a perfect circle and you're not going to align it perfectly, so you might have a little kink in it. So try and do, when they're this small, it's okay, and it's relatively easy. So again, I find myself start at the top and work my way around. Pat it dry so I can see where I'm going next. Again, my stencil's staying there. I'm not wiping anything away. I'm just dip in again to my hustle butter. Especially if I'm dabbing after every line, and it might take away a bit of the hustle butter, but it's just, again, it's that whole idea, getting used to the routine of doing it. And a little tip, I mean, everyone does their stencils differently, but when there's like loads of little things going on and I need to know which bit I tattoo and which I don't, I usually put like little dots in, so I know one area is going to be skin tone, one area is going to be the light tone, so it stops me accidentally shading in an area that I shouldn't do. I put that on my stencil, and then as I'm tattooing, just as a little reminder, just a little dot, so I know I shouldn't go over it. Especially when it's like a symmetrical design. So again, I'm lining this now, so this is at 7.3. Okay, now we've got the difficult, like the longer lines now. So this is where we need to pull the skin relatively tight, because we've got to start on the curve of the arm now, so it will look like it's going to distort. So we're going to get really tight, try and do it in one movement. Start at the top, really press the skin up. Another thing I noticed when I was an apprentice, like, obviously when you apply the stencil, do it with them how they're going to naturally be. So if this was on a leg, I would have them standing when I put it on. Try not to have them like sat down as you do it, and then tattoo it. Otherwise, it'll be really off. The stencil will be all over the shop. But also, like, trust your stencil. If you're at a curved part of the area and you're tattooing it, it looks like it's not right, the stencil is correct. Try not to like even out a line mid-line just because you think it's right. But I know this bit's going to be solid black, so I can afford to like stop my line halfway down if I wasn't going to make it. Because I know I can just even that out when I do the solid black. When it comes to like points at the top, when I am trying to reconnect to it, if you have to, let's say, hang your needle out quite far, and just kind of etch it in so you know where your line is, and then when you find it, just begin your line as normal, just press down a little bit more, just so you get an even depth at the top. So pulling towards myself again, curved line. Just start on a part halfway up the curve just so I can get a smooth line. Dab any excess ink off. Do that again. So we'll start at the point, arc it round, skin is tight, and I'm just guiding the machine and the needle. I'm not moving my hand too much, I'm purely just guiding. So again, when it comes to curves, I'll start at the point, go halfway down, or 3/4 down on this point here. Because I know I can get the curve at a better angle if I've got to pull towards myself right at the end. If you need to assess, like, can you make the line, you can always like fake line, pretend you're going to line, just to see if you can make the line before you actually do it. That way you can readjust yourself if you feel you have to. Well, don't be afraid to move your client in different positions to make it easy for you as well. Really stretch the skin. Because you'll notice there, like, the skin begins to arc a little bit, so you kind of lose a bit of the pressure. So really just separate it. Spread it with your fingers. So what we're going to try and do, we're going to get all the line work done first, then we're going to do the shading afterwards. Because down here is a lot of shading, so there was not a lot of line work. That's why I switched between the line work and the shading, just to, as I sort of go up here, because this is all like solid line work and solid black, we can get it all lined up first, and then I can refer to my shading afterwards. Again, as I sort of go, remember I said about the markers that I already had in there, so I know I need these two to be shaded, I'll just put little dots in, little markings, just so I know. Alright, so as I sort of go, I know I bounce around a little bit, but any sort of reference shading that I have, I'm just going to mark in now. So, same as before, I'm going to keep running it pretty high because this is going to be solid black, so just as a rough mark in, that zigzag motion I spoke about earlier, back and forward really quick, keeping the needle in the skin, and it'll give me the perfect reference that I need. I know that's going to be solid, so that can just be marked in, but I need to get the correct shape. So, because I'm doing solid black, you'll notice when I do solid black stippling, I will run my machine higher than if I'm doing the shading. So again, I'm applying a bit more pressure. So I'm pressing maybe 60% of what I would use to line. Okay, go back to line work now. So we're back at like 7.4. Okay. Make sure the machine's up. Again, if this is upside down, the needle's going to snag, so make sure you can always see like the hole at the top where you can actually see the needle through. Otherwise it will just go against itself and you'll have like snagging. And it's okay to be a little messy. I know some people like to line the whole thing and then just wipe it all down, but again, because this has so many little elements to it, with the shading and the line work, I like to just do it as I go, like bounce between the both. Again, I know I keep repeating it, it's just repetition, just remember that repetition of doing the same thing over and over. we're going to have a nice, this will be solid black, and we'll have a nice fade that we can put in here. That's what I'm doing now. I didn't mark it on my stencil, but there's a gap I need to create, so I'll line this bit in. I want a little, almost like a light reference point, so I'm going to go a couple of mil just below and just whip away before we work on the fade that we're going to have in this area here. So I just kind of like scribble in some markings just so I know, because when we build up the tone this will all blend in anyway. There'll be a lot of cross hatching in this area. One thing I was taught as well is just trying to approach each line as its own like individual tattoo. So each line is its own separate tattoo. Just, you know, start again on each one. Realign yourself. If you do get an instance where, say, the stencil is starting to go, we'll just mark those in first. We'll just get them in so we don't lose them. And just move myself around because I know I can get this line a lot cleaner if I reposition myself and my machine and then go straight in. Okay, we're losing the stencil a little bit here, so I'm just going to get this in now. I can still just about see it. That way if I do accidentally wipe, it's already done. Again, with my line work, I'm currently running at 7.5, which means I can move my hand a bit quicker on these lines, especially with the longer lines. I feel it's easier to do one quick motion than it is to slowly drag a line. You're more likely to get kinks in it. It'll be a lot less consistent. Remember, whenever I do a small curved line that's either circular, I will start on the loop itself and work my way around. Just going to wipe down what we've done so far. Let's give it a wipe down. Again, something we were just marking in just so we've got a future reference. And now, because the stencil is so like thick and dense, and my 3 is quite small, if I've accidentally missed a line, I can just now see where it is. It lightens up the stencil without removing it, because you've got a lot of leeway with a stencil. So now I know I've missed that line, so I can go back into this one. Again, let's find our line and pull. Something like this, just etch it in, find the point, and then start your line. That's a good example. When I pull the skin, it looks like it has slightly distorted and warped. Naturally, I'd want to straighten it up, but just, you know, it's only when you're distorting the stencil itself. Just follow it. Just take your time with circles. I know they're a pain, but just really take your time. Try and just move my actual hand in a circular motion. Try to move your whole hand. Just move it between your fingers. I like to start where the 2 points meet, so if I do start outside of it, if I start next to it, then I can always work my way back in with the next one if it's slightly out. Okay, so this stencil gets a bit tricky. I'm going to work on my curved bits first. Again, I'm always moving myself to where I'm most comfortable with the line. I know I can pull it. Okay, so this bit here, start the loop. I want it to be a pointed edge, so kind of create a little curve at the end of it. Going up and then down is just easier than starting at a point here and then having to reconnect that point. A good way to practice actually, especially on curved parts of the body, with your line work, is fruit. You know, you can start tattooing fruit just to work on like curves and angles. That's how I started out. Otherwise, yeah, then it's just a case of your fingers, your balance. I use my pinky a lot just to like lean either to spread the skin or just as a guide. So all I've got to do is just have the pressure on the finger and just pull it across. Just gives you, it's like a stabilizer. It just gives me a lot more control over what I'm doing. But pulling the skin taut is probably the main thing you need to do to pull a good line. Otherwise, it's just like the needle's just going to bounce everywhere. It's just going to plod along. As you make it taut and tight. Reposition myself a little bit, because I know I'm going to have to create this curve. Okay, I think that's the line work done. So it's going to wipe it down, see if there's any like lines we need to go over, and then we can start the solid black. Always check in with your client, make sure they're all right. Excellent, really good. Okay, that's what I need for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all the solid little pockets of black, and then that'll allow, if I need to like reline anything, then if the solid black's in there, I might have to do an outer edge, because some of this is like marked in, because I know it's solid black in each individual like bead is a solid black, so the line work hasn't got to be 100%. So we're going to bring it down to about 7 now. Getting the needles hung out. This is how I sort of pack black. In a small area, this is how I do it. On a large area, I'll probably speed it up slightly. But now we're going to do little pockets of black. Again, this is where you keep the needle in the skin, just work your way across. Do the cross-hatching method, but just the same way. You're actually applying pressure here to create the solid black. You're not brushing this bit in. Not so much, not the same way as you would like lining. Otherwise you will cause blowouts. Okay, now we just start doing in between of the beads. Yeah, there's no need to whip in these areas because you're packing solid black, so maybe press slightly harder, but because we're running the machine higher, I don't press as hard as you would when you're stippling, but maybe just press it a little bit harder, because the machine is still going to do the work for you. In some areas you can just like dot it in. So an area here, for example, we can just dot this bit in. Again, not pressing the whole needle in, just kind of the first mil or so. Because that's purely because I hang my needle out quite a lot. And if I was to press the whole cartridge in, the whole needle, you will get a blowout. Again, because this design is quite small, I'm not going to go over the top with the details. Sometimes I might shade an area, but if we're doing this size, sometimes like less is more, especially in these tight areas, because some details won't hold. So just a case of simplifying what you've done. You can do the whole thing as dotted. You can dot everything in individually in each gap. So you can do like this, individual dots, build it up. Again, don't press too hard, otherwise you'll get blowout. Again, purely because I'm running it so high. And never forget, this is the one liner, so there is a 5mm stroke on this one. For example, we can dot this bit in here. Constant, like, consistent dots as well. You don't have to like bounce around all over, just build it up. It's the same outcome, it's just in a smaller area you can dot it in. It keeps it a consistent black as well. There's going to be no skin breaks in that, or inconsistent shading. For this bit we're going to continue with the dotting in, and then the other side I will do the other version of solid black. But for now, keep it consistent. Get to know the depth. Get to know your needle depth, especially when, depending on how far you hang it out. If I was to bring it in, there'll be a lot more ink everywhere. If I was to make my needle depth any shorter. Again, that's why the hustle butter is so important. It does stop a lot of the ink like going everywhere, spraying everywhere, so you can't see where you're going. I have been told I can sing now though, so that's part of the tutorial now. But what we get, we don't know. I do find though, singing does help me. If I'm doing a mundane bit like solid black. Tallying black. So as I am going, if I do want to, if I'm packing in the black, and it just allows me to clean up any imperfections you might have. It's the reason I have like a layer of black above and below. When I do like beads and stuff, it just gives me a bit of leeway. So if it's not a perfect circle, I can just edge it in with the black and tighten up any circles. Okay, try not to overdo it though, because you can get to a point where you just want to keep going and going, tighten it up, and then you close the gap too much. If it's a large area of black and I want it to be saturated, then I'll use a mag, but with stuff like palm and hand size stuff, I can get away with doing it all with a 3. Anything larger, you can still do it with a 3, it's pointless because it's just going to take too long and you're just churning up the skin when a mag would be sufficient. But if I'm doing like a gradual fade, I'll pack the solid black with a mag and then whip out at the end with a 3. But with stuff like this, because it's on a smaller scale, that's why I prefer even to the 5s. It's just these are really tight groupings. But yeah, anything bigger than this, and yeah, I could use. I'll just still do it with a 3. But depending on the look you want, if you want it to look a bit more stippled, then you could use a 0.35 gauge or 0.3. I like to get all my
my blacks in first, especially my solid blacks. Before I do any shading, I like to get all the solid black done first, especially if there's a lot of line work. If it's a realism piece just like this, then it's all obviously built up and I'll just do it as I go. But if it's framework or anything solid, then I like to get all the solid blacks done first and then work on my shading afterwards, because I can always work away from my solid blacks. If I shade too much and then go over it with solid black, there's more chance that you're going to scar the skin if you go too many times. Again, we can already see how the skin's not even red, just because how gentle actually this style of tattooing is. But now my line work's in as well, I can use a bit more like green soap and not be as rough. You can still cross hatch as well if you're doing solid black. If you've probably got like 2 or 3 passes on it, especially if you're pressing a bit harder. Just soothe the skin. Again, it just allows us to see if we've got any imperfected lines that we can go over, just tighten up. Alright, so now we're going to do like a larger area of solid black. So I will reduce the speed slightly. So now we're going to go to like, now I'm going to run it at 6.8. So same as before, I am going to use the same application. I'm just going to work away from the tight areas, to map in where my solid black is. Again, so even if some of the lines aren't fully in there because I've just kind of mapped it in, then now, because it's going to be solid black, I could just work my way up to the edge of it. But I've given myself more of a gap of a skin break, so when it does settle down, you're going to have solid black and then you have a skin break there. Okay, so now we'll work our way across like we did at the start when it was like etching it across like this, but we're going to just press a little harder this time. Probably 70% of what you would when you put in a line. I'm probably a bit more expressive when I pack in my black. It's a lot less like regimented because we are solid black, so we will be doing some cross hatching, so I'm just making sure it's in. Again, a lot of up and down motion. This is how I get my solid black in. If we're near an edge of a line, that's when I'll probably be a bit more, I'll do a bit more circular motions just to give myself almost like a barrier. So when I do my longer strokes with the solid black like this, there's like a thicker edge and I'm less likely to go over my line. So go next to the lines I've already made. Small circular motions, as if I'm giving it like a thicker edge without using a line. I'm just, it's almost going next to it with like an 11 liner. So I'm just going to do small circular motions, give myself that barrier. Again, we're running it currently this one's at 6.8. I do find that when I do my drawings, I do try and think, how will they look as tattoos? So when I do my biro stuff, I try and approach it in a way of, I try to put less details in. If I'm doing a tattoo design, I'll do a bit less detail. I approach it the same way. Can I tattoo this the same way as I've drawn it? And that's the way I like to look at my designs now. That's the way I approach most of my artwork, design-wise, is like, is there too many details in there? But that's why I try and approach my tattooing the same way, is so when I am doing my drawings and I am doing my my tattooing, and they're very similar now. Whereas beforehand I used to just draw realism. I've had to almost train my brain to draw in a different way now. If I'm doing my portraits, then I'll tattoo my realism, but if I'm tattooing flash designs, things like this, I do think, you know, is it tattooable, basically? Because some things will need to be simplified, especially when it comes to this surrealism stuff, when there's a lot of lines and there's a lot of close gaps. Then I have to think longevity. If the lines are too close, eventually over time they will close in. So when I do my designs, the designs now as well, I like to do them physically, like on paper still, apart from digital. I will mock up my designs sometimes. I'll have an idea, sketch it out and use Procreate to create my designs, but I still like to draw physically. It helps me when I approach it as a tattoo. So instead of just dropping my colours in or on an iPad, it's almost like doing it twice. So when I do my drawing, do the drawing side of it, and when I tattoo, it's like I've already done it. Also, I'm not very good at digital art, so but it's good to train. I still agree with drawing physically. It just helps me with my tattooing, especially the way I use a 3-liner. I kind of approach it the same way as I would with my pen, because it's fine and to a point, which is why I don't use mags as much. I feel like they're very, very similar. Beforehand, when I did did pure realism, I guess there's a lot of Photoshop manipulations. I wasn't drawing as much. Whereas now, I think it's important for any artist to draw or do some artistic or painting or anything like that, especially if you're starting out. I think a lot of artists nowadays or studios want to see physical media. So what we're doing before we get into any of the lighter areas, which is going to be up here, we're just going to pack in, I say, our solid black. Again, it might take maybe 2 passes to get the black solid, and maybe just an extra pass just to tighten things up. But we're going to give that area 5-10 minutes just to bleed out, and then we'll wipe it down, and we can see if there's any imperfections or if any shade needs to be gone over. Again, remember, I am pressing a bit harder when it comes to my solid black, so same technique as it would be with the shading. I'm just applying a bit more force, moving my hand a bit quicker as well. Again, keeping the needle in the skin, but moving along quite quickly, so I'm not stationary for too long and I'm churning the skin up. I'm very consistent with my movement and the speed at which I'm moving along, and changing my angle if I need to. Okay, that means my needle's not out far enough, so now that's better. Again, sometimes cartridges can just feel different, even if it's the same setting. Sometimes I feel like a cartridge can just hit slightly different, so you can just adjust it there and there. Sometimes you might have to run it slightly lower, even though this is a fresh needle, it was hitting slightly different. So I've just turned it down a little bit. And we come to a tight point at the top, that's when I'll dot. So if I dot in near the top, if I'm getting to an area of shading before I need to like double buff on the black, I'll do it now, as I will. Whip the whole area, so I'll cover the whole surface area of the tattoo now. I'm not going to leave any skin break now. Even if it's a really light area, I'm still going to open the skin up. And then when I build up the tone, the one pass I've created will be my light tone. Again, like we did before, the pendulum motion. So you'll see I've opened up everything in there, so now I'm just going to build my way back into that spot. Because it's still like circular, I will do cross hatching. If it was like flat, I just do the same direction the same way. If I want something a flat object, I'll do the same shading, same direction consistently. Whereas something rounded or cylindrical, you could build up with cross hatching to create that bend and the light sources. Again, just tightening bits up as we go. There are areas that need more black, we can just add that as we go. Because now here, it's not a case of we can just do that solid black, but we can add a little bit of depth here. So I'm just going to whip away from this point here, just to add a little bit of gradient. So let's put some hustle butter down. Run our machine at 6.5 now. I'm just going to whip out. Again, work our way across, same lines, directional lines up. We're going to whip away from our solid black edge, because we want the lightest part to be near the black at the top here. So I'm just going to whip away from the black. So we want to whip out as we reach the top. And that way, when it settles down, you're going to notice the gradient. Okay, so now we're going to work on this is where we want to create our light source, and this is where we now whip in from our darkest point again. So we add a little drop shadow to this spike here. Again, getting to know light sources is a great skill. Just know where your light and darks are. Like practicing on still life is probably a good way to draw. Something cylindrical, something circular. Again, because I want to create a fade, I'm not pressing as hard now. We're not doing solid black. So like that whole brush stroke kind of motion. Again, we want to cover all of the skin as well. We want to open everything up. It's the same technique. Even if you've got to move your hand, you're still going to be whipping down or towards yourself. So I can angle, I'm still going to whip towards myself. Again, remember, cross hatching works for circular objects. Okay, you're probably going to look at like 3 or 4 passes before you get the blend. You can go backwards and forwards on itself. You can just keep the needle in, go backwards and forwards. Again, cross hatching. We know where our light source is in here, so we want to accentuate that bit. So that's probably our lightest tone now. So now we just want to work our way towards that bit. And like I said before, going same what we've been doing, but go to like 75% of the way now. Same as before, because that is now our lightest area. We don't want to go over that anymore. Again, doesn't matter if we're going across, up, down, as long as we're stopping at the 3/4 mark. And that's how you kind of create a nice blend of black. And always start from your darkest point and whip into the light when you're doing shading, if you want to create a blend. So we know this bit is solid black, so I'm just going to do a bit more solid black here. You dot in our spike. That's where our point is. And again, the one thing I will say to anyone is just patience. With any even if you're starting out, it's just take time to draw, take your time. Don't worry about rushing it, don't worry about the numbers. Just honestly take your time. You'll find out with different skin types, you'll have to approach it a different way. Someone's got sensitive skin, you have to do a few extra passes of the skin. You have to run your machine a bit lower. You might only get 1 or 2 passes. Alright, now we're going to do a fade here. So this is going to be more of a grey here, so I want it to be a bit lighter. We're going to create a glow around this. And because we've already got the black here, all we're going to do is just whip away slowly. So we're going to turn our machine down, back to our normal speed, 6.2. Like we did at the start, it's just going to be a gradual, it's going to be a slower speed now. And maintain that pendulum motion, yeah? Now we have got to work between the little gaps here as well, so we'll just do one pass, open up the skin. Sometimes you'll do it and it looks like nothing's even in there. But you're just slowly building it up. Again, we've got a bit of leeway now because we've got the black already there. Try not to go over and into where the beads are. Again, this is where we'll probably do the same motion the whole way. But we will blend right to the point of the ball. So we're going to open up most of the skin here. Remember, the longer the stroke, the softer it will be. So the way we're doing it here is we're kind of like pulling the needle away at the three-quarter way, so I'm just kind of lifting it out. Getting that whole like pendulum, but also like scooping, so in and out, in and out. Backwards and forwards. Obviously, the slower you go as well, the more coverage you're going to get, and it's a bit more evenly spread. Obviously, I do want the stipple, but I still want it to be relatively even. It'll start to take shape now. Slightly different angle, and now we're going to start shading to about 50% of what we've already done. We've already got our gradient. Now we can incorporate a bit now of some cross hatching. Again, same way, working your way across slowly, but try and keep the groupings like close together, so the lines are pretty close together. So it's consistent. Now we're starting to get that glow. If people are starting off with like, they want to know how to like the stipple, I suggest getting maybe a 0.35 gauge cartridge, or maybe like a 5 liner, just to work on technique, because 3s can be a bit sharper and it does handle slightly differently. So maybe get a 5, maybe like a 0.3 or 3.5 gauge, and then do what I've been doing. Again, practice on fake skin first. We'll go straight in. Because once you learn how to stipple, that's half your job done. You just got to practice like needle depth, how you stipple, dark to light. There's many ways you can actually stipple, so. Now, most of the ball is done, so we'll work on the spiky bits now. I'm going to reline, go back to our lining needle, and then we'll do a little fade in each one. So I do want some skin breaks between the black we've already got and that, so I'm just going to do 2 simple lines. As before, gentle fade. The way I do the spikes on mine, I just go from the top and just whip down. Again, because this area is so dense, I want a lot of light in the spikes. There's just a few simple lines and fade out from the top. Otherwise there's too much going on in the middle. Just going back and finishing up any untidy lines. Because now we've got the black in here, we haven't got to do a whole line anymore, we're just going to work away just from that point, so we just straighten that edge up a bit. Alright, so what I'm doing now, I'm just tightening up a few little lines. Got another fresh needle. Even though I only use like one 3-round liner, I use multiple. If I feel like, again, if I've used one for an excessive period of time, then I will just change it up for the sake of it. Get sharper line work. Everyone's got their own feel to their machines and their needles. Sometimes if it just doesn't feel right, then I will just change it. Okay, so we're just going to whip out a little bit. I'm going to keep running it at the same speed because it's such a small area. I'm just going to whip out ever so slightly on this bit. I'll try and match the angle of my line. Still with the pendulum motion, but I'm just going to follow the direction of the curve. So I don't want to zigzag here because I want it to be a whip out. I'm just going to whip towards the line I'm following. Obviously I'm running it quite high here. Get that nice gradual fade. Just get these little subtle marks, that's why we run it really high, just so I can create these little tiny lines. So I'm only creating the impression here, and if I run it too slow, it's not going to go in the skin. So if I run it quite high and just do a quick whip round. It's quite subtle, but it just makes a bit of a difference. Again, because this is on such a smaller scale, I'm going to be running the machine a lot higher by hanging my needle out as well. Because if this was a larger scale, I'd be able to go slower. We've got such a small space to work in that the higher the machine's running, the easier it's going to go into the skin. So now we're just purely just polishing up everything now. So any little lines, any imperfections. And that's why we give stuff at least an hour to settle down, and you can look back over your stuff. You just tidy up anything that needs to be done. And you'll be able to see if any of the black needs a bit more going over it. Give it one wipe. Okay, just got a little bit in the flail, and then that's pretty much done. You know, I'm running my machine really high now because this has already had like 3 passes on the skin, so now I'm running it really high and just brushing over the top. And that should saturate it fully. Again, notice I'm always working my way in as well. I'm always whipping towards myself. Just do the final wipe just to see any little bits. Like I said, we're not going to do any white in this because the skin tone is going to create the white, and it's blackwork, so we want the black to be the prominent feature in this. So it's just one bit, hang on. Famous last words. It's never done. We're going to do a final wipe down because I think we're done. Do one wipe. Okay, and now we're done. And now we're going to move on to the aftercare. So I'm just going to apply some witch hazel to the area. I'm just going to let it settle down for like 5 minutes. It's just going to help take any redness away. Obviously you've got fresh, clean gloves on, bit of tissue. I'm just going to pass it direct to the skin. Cover the tattoo, and what I usually do is I'll leave this on for about 5 minutes, and it'll take away any excess redness. So when we get our photos, yeah, there'll be no redness, and it'll be just clear up any of the surrounding skin. Okay, so now we've had the tattoos had like 5–10 minutes just for it to settle down after the witch hazel. We've given it a final wipe down, and now we're going to apply the aftercare, which is like Dermalize. And it's just basically a protective barrier that's going to heal it for her. She's going to keep it on for a day or so, replace it tomorrow, and then another 3 or 4 days, and it should give it a perfect heal. It allows you to, I say, still shower as normal. It just speeds up the healing process. So what I usually do is I snip about half it off. I usually try and keep at least 1 inch or so around the whole tattoo, so I've got a few ready, but I also snip the edges and cut it accordingly, so otherwise it's too wide. So we're going to use a small bit at the bottom. So we've cropped it, and we're going to just cover it. So you peel one side, hold the tab end, make sure that there's at least 1 inch around the tattoo. You don't want any air bubbles, so we're just going to press it from the middle and out. Get rid of the tab end. Just fold it down. So now you've got these green arrows here. You're just going to peel these either side, and then this is the film that will be on for the first 24 hours, and then they will replace it themselves tomorrow. So we've got no bubbles there.
So the second layer, I'm going to overlay it slightly by like ½ an inch or so, just so it's got room to breathe. Same as before, just align it, make sure it's covered. A slight overlay. Good thing about Dermalize is it keeps all the little details in as well without, there's less chance of knocking it and like causing a scab and any dropout. So put this down. So speed it up by at least 30–40% the healing period. So they'll keep this on for a day, replace it tomorrow, give it a wash, apply the second layer, keep it on for 3 to 4 days, and by the time you take it off the second time, either pretty much healed, or you might need an extra week or so just moisturizing it. But that's how I Dermalize it. There's no bubbles and they're free to leave. Nice and shiny. Boop. So guys, tattoo finished, tutorial finished, everything's finished. I hope you all enjoyed and learned something new today. I'm going home.